She stopped talking about US and started talking about what she deserved. It started small. Glances that lingered too long on luxury magazine spreads, a sigh that stretched too deep when the car didn't start, and an almost wistful tone when she'd say, "Kara and James just bought a lake house." At first, I didn't flinch. Everyone dreams. Everyone wants more. But this didn't feel like dreaming anymore. It felt like planning. Plans I wasn't in. She'd scroll endlessly through designer bags and real estate listings, her finger tracing the screen like she could touch that world from our tiny living room. She never said she was unhappy. She didn't need to. The silence between her words filled in the rest. I started noticing how often she said the word deserve. I deserve a break. I deserve to feel special. I deserve more than this. She never finished the sentence. More than this, you? I'd come home with takeout, something she used to love, and she'd barely look up. Once I caught her staring at a photo of us from our honeymoon. She smiled, but it wasn't the warm kind. It was the kind you give to a memory that's faded. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "Nothing. I'm just tired." But it wasn't the kind of tired you fix with sleep. The first real crack came on a Tuesday. I remember because it rained all night and she wore perfume to get groceries. She never wore perfume to the store. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. That couples go through phases. That maybe she was just restless. But restlessness doesn't explain why she started locking her phone. It doesn't explain why she suddenly needed space but never offered the same in return. She started staying out later, claiming traffic or errands. Her stories were always almost right, just believable enough to keep me quiet. But the math didn't add up. The timelines blurred. She once said she had lunch with her sister at a place I knew her sister hated. Another time she came home in heels but swore she just walked around the mall. Then came the look. That blank stare when I said, "I love you." That moment where her eyes didn't meet mine. She nodded, smiled, but it was muscle memory, not emotion. It was like watching someone pretend to be themselves. That night, she said she was too tired to talk. And an hour later, I heard muffled laughter behind the bathroom door. When I walked past, I caught her whispering, "I wish you were here." She said it softly. Too softly. But not to me. I didn't ask. Not yet. Because when love begins to rot, you don't rip it apart. You listen. You wait. You try to understand the sound of the silence. But that silence? It was starting to scream. She said love was beautiful, but money made life easier. She started dressing like she was going somewhere better than here. Not provocatively, just differently. Cleaner lines. Sharper heels. Price tags that didn't match our budget. I asked once, jokingly, "New client meeting I don't know about?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night, I noticed the tags were still on one of the bags she brought home. When I asked if she was returning it, she just shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. She stopped asking me to join her for dinner. Stopped waiting. I'd come home to cold plates on the counter, a post-it note that read, "Had a bite earlier," and the low glow of her laptop screen lighting up the living room. She used to read cookbooks. Now it was travel blogs. Yachts in Capri. Villas in Bali. Hidden luxury escapes with price per night rates that made my chest tighten. She'd scroll with one hand, wine in the other, humming along to music that didn't sound like her. Not the girl I married. Once I tried to sit beside her just to see. Just to join. She didn't even look up. Just whispered, "Wouldn't it be something?" I didn't ask what she meant. Because I already knew. She talked a lot about potential. Not mine. Not ours. Hers. I just feel like I was meant for more. She'd say it casually. As if it wasn't a knife wrapped in a compliment. As if she wasn't carving herself out of the life we'd built together. It was around then that her phone never left her side. She used to toss it on the couch, screen up, forgotten. Yeah? It was face down. Always. Even in the bathroom. She started laughing at things I wasn't part of. Inside jokes with people I never met. Smiles that weren't for me. I'd watch her from across the room, lit by the pale glow of a screen, laughing softly at something or someone, and I'd realize. That smile used to be mine. She never said she was leaving. But she stopped arriving. We'd lie in the same bed, inches apart and miles away. She'd fall asleep facing the wall. And I'd lie awake wondering if her dreams still had room for me. One night, she murmured in her sleep, soft and slurred. "Don't worry, I'll find a way." I wanted to ask, find a way to what? But I was afraid of the answer. I tried to fix things. Made reservations at her favorite place. Surprised her with a weekend off-grid. She came, smiled, took photos of the food. But she didn't post them. Didn't tag me. Didn't even save them. It was like I was a placeholder. A chapter she was trying to write her way out of. "Love is beautiful," she said once. But money makes life easier. She didn't say it to me. She said it to herself. And in that moment I realized she was choosing ease over effort, fantasy over foundation. Her heart wasn't broken. It was for sale. She had a new perfume and it wasn't from me. She walked through the door like she was returning from a different life. Not just tired or distracted, altered. Like something had shifted inside her and she didn't know how to set it down. And then there was the smell. It wasn't hers. Not lavender or vanilla, the soft familiar notes I used to find on her pillow. This was bolder. Sharper. Something foreign and expensive. I didn't ask where it came from, because the question already had an answer. She smiled too quickly that night. The kind of smile that covers panic. She tossed her bag on the floor, kicked off her shoes, and said something about traffic. But I barely heard her. Her phone lit up twice before she'd even taken off her coat. She glanced at the screen but didn't open it. Just turned it over. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. This time, she picked it up and walked out of the room. I wanted to believe it was stress. I wanted to believe we were just in a rough patch. But love isn't supposed to feel like surveillance. And yet, there I was, noticing timestamps, watching where her eyes went, listening for the pauses between her words. She started coming home later. Always with a reason. But the reasons started repeating. The same client dinners. The same deadlines. She claimed she was working overtime. But she came back in heels that hadn't touched an office floor. One night, I offered to pick her up from work. She hesitated. Said she'd already called a rideshare. But when I checked the app later, there was no ride. Just a gap. A silence in the timeline that didn't make sense. She said she was at a conference. But I found the badge still sitting unopened in the drawer. She said she went to lunch with Sarah. But I saw Sarah that weekend and she didn't mention it. The lies weren't loud. They didn't come with broken glass or slammed doors. They came in whispers. In the tiny fractures of her stories. In the way she looked over my shoulder when she spoke. Like she was checking to see if I was still paying attention. I tried once gently to ask if everything was okay. She smiled. Said she was just tired of the same routine. But her voice didn't match her words. And I saw the way her thumb grazed her phone like it held something precious. She wasn't tired. She was distracted. Possibly enchanted. Some nights she'd come home humming. Not any song I recognized, but like a melody was stuck in her head. One night I asked what it was. She blinked. As if she didn't realize she'd been humming at all. That was the first time I felt it, the weight of a truth unspoken. Something was happening. And it had nothing to do with us. I stopped asking questions. Not because I didn't want answers, but because I knew the answers would lie. And lies, when repeated enough, become their own kind of truth. She said she was with a friend. I saw her get into a black Mercedes. There's a kind of silence that screams. Not in words, but in moments. In the way your heart starts pounding over things that shouldn't matter. A Thursday night. She said she was meeting Rachel for dinner, something casual, girls catching up. I nodded, kissed her cheek, and watched her walk out in a dress I hadn't seen before. Too much for pasta and wine. Too perfect to be unintentional. Still, I said nothing. Because part of me wanted to believe. Even when another part had already stopped. I followed her. Not proudly. But sometimes the truth won't come to your door, you have to go looking for it. I stayed back, 2 cars behind. She didn't notice. At the corner near the hotel district, she stepped out of her car. Waited. And then, like clockwork, a black Mercedes pulled up. Tinted windows. Chrome trim. Cleaner than anything we could afford. It wasn't Rachel driving. It wasn't a woman. He stepped out tall, expensive, composed. The kind of man who doesn't chase women. He expects them to arrive. She smiled. Not politely, intimately. Like she'd practiced that look in the mirror. Like she knew exactly how it would land. He opened the passenger door. She got in. Her hand brushed his shoulder as she settled beside him. Like they'd done it 100 times. They didn't see me. And even if they had, I don't think they would have stopped. Some betrayals don't explode. They glide away on 4 wheels, smooth and silent. She came home earlier than expected. Rachel canceled, she said, setting down her purse. Didn't feel like staying out. She even brought takeout. From our favorite spot, like muscle memory. Like guilt softened by familiarity. I nodded. Told her I was glad she was back. But inside, something broke. Not all at once. Not loudly. It cracked, the way ice splits beneath your feet before it gives. I didn't confront her. Not that night. Because when someone tells their first lie, you watch what they do with it. Do they protect it? Nurture it? Build more lies around it like scaffolding? I needed to know how far she'd go. Because the moment you speak the truth aloud, the game ends. And I wasn't ready for it to end. Not yet. So I smiled. I listened. I played along. All while the image replayed in my mind. Her hand on his shoulder. That look in her eyes. The ease. The confidence. She wasn't falling into something. She'd already landed. One photo changed everything. It came through while I was making coffee. An ordinary morning. Ordinary until my phone buzzed with a message from a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. No greeting. No explanation. Just a photo. I didn't recognize the background at first. Blue water, palm trees, the kind of resort that promises you paradise in exchange for forgetting who you are. But I recognized her. Floating in the pool, cocktail in hand, head tilted back in laughter. Wrapped around someone who wasn't me. His arms held her like they'd done it before. Like they knew where she fit. And she wasn't wearing her ring. No gold band. No hesitation. Just sun-kissed skin and betrayal disguised as happiness. I stared at the image for a long time. Not out of shock, that part had passed. It was the details that cut the deepest. The way her body curved toward his without thought. The way her eyes were closed, trusting. The way her smile looked so effortless, like she hadn't left someone behind. Like I never existed. I scrolled up looking for context. It wasn't a private photo. It was in a resort's promotional campaign. A live candid they tagged on social media. Part of a story. And there she was, front and center. The woman who told me she needed time to find herself. Apparently, she'd found herself in the arms of someone else. I zoomed in, not because I needed more proof, but because I couldn't look away. That bathing suit? She told me she didn't have anything nice to wear the last time I suggested a weekend away. The sunglasses? I'd seen them in our house, still with the tag. She'd packed them in silence. Booked the trip while I cooked dinner. Laughed like that while I lay awake wondering what I'd done wrong. That night, she came home as if nothing had happened. Her skin still holding the faintest tan, her hair still smelling like ocean wind. Just stayed with a friend near the coast, she said. I nodded, because by then I didn't need her to tell me the truth. A photo had already done it for her. There's something final about a picture. It captures the lie and frames it forever. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood in the kitchen, the coffee long gone cold, and stared at the proof that everything I'd suspected was real. She hadn't just left her home. She'd erased me completely. Do you chase someone who's already gone? The bed felt colder. But the air, it felt lighter. That's what got me. Not the silence she left behind, but the weight that went with her. At night, I still turned toward her side, half expecting the shape of her to be there. But it wasn't. Just a folded blanket, untouched. And still, I missed her. Or maybe I missed the idea of her. The version that laughed at my jokes, that stole my hoodies and danced barefoot in the kitchen. The version that never existed. My heart wanted to forgive. To believe that people get lost sometimes. That maybe she'd wake up one morning, realize what she'd done, and come running back. But my pride, it didn't move. It sat like stone. Not out of strength, but out of exhaustion. Because love doesn't feel like begging. And I was tired of asking for what should have been given freely. I'd stare at my phone, thumb hovering over her name. Not to yell. Not to accuse. Just to ask why. Why him? Why now? Why this? But then I'd remember her face in that photo, glowing, unbothered, alive in a world I wasn't invited to. She didn't look like someone who regretted anything. She looked free. That's when the question started to echo. Do you chase someone who's already gone? Not physically. Emotionally. Spiritually. She'd left long before her suitcase did. Left piece by piece with every unanswered text, every half-hearted kiss, every "I'm tired" said through clenched teeth. I just didn't want to see it. Because seeing it meant admitting the truth. That I was holding on to someone who had already let go. I'd hear her laugh in memories and it would still make my chest ache. But it was no longer a hunger. It was grief. Not for her. But for the version of myself who believed she was coming back. Maybe losing her wasn't the worst part. Maybe the real pain was realizing she'd made peace with leaving before I'd even asked her to stay. And I'd been here, still setting the table for two. She walked out the door with her head high, and I didn't stop her. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just said, I need more. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Almost like it was a weather report. Something factual, undeniable, and entirely out of my control. Love's not enough, she added, as she zipped up the last of her bags. She didn't mean it to hurt, but it did, because love was all I had left. She packed quickly, too quickly, like she'd done it in her head 100 times before, like she already knew what fit and what didn't. Her fingers didn't hesitate. No glances at photo frames. No deep sighs over the sweater I once wrapped around her shoulders in the middle of a storm. Just clothes, makeup, a charger, and silence. I watched from the hallway, frozen in the doorway, gripping the frame like it might anchor me. I thought I'd beg, thought I'd say something, anything. But the words refused to come. They didn't get stuck in my throat. They just never arrived. Because somewhere deep down I knew, if she wanted to stay, she would have. She slung the bag over her shoulder, stood up straight, and looked at me for the last time. Not with hate, not even regret, just detachment, like I was a chapter she didn't hate, but had no interest in rereading. She walked toward the door, opened it, and stepped into her new life. I didn't stop her, not because I didn't love her, but because I finally loved myself enough to let her leave. When the door clicked shut, the silence fell like a blanket soaked in ice water. I stood there for a long time, listening to the nothing, the echo of a goodbye never spoken. That night I broke down, just once. Not because I wanted her back, but because I finally admitted how long I'd been pretending she was still here. I screamed into a pillow, hit the couch cushions like they could absorb everything I couldn't say. And when the storm passed, I sat still, wrapped in the kind of quiet that only follows truth. She left with her suitcase. I stayed with the silence. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel crazy. I felt free. Not healed. Not yet, but free. 1 year later, she came back. Not as the woman who left, but as someone shattered. It was raining. Not the kind of soft, cinematic rain you see in movies, but cold, unforgiving sheets of water that made everything feel heavier. I almost didn't open the door. It was late. I wasn't expecting anyone, but something, maybe instinct, maybe dread, pulled me to the threshold. And there she was, hair soaked, eyes hollow, no umbrella, no luggage, no pride, just her. Not the version who walked out with her head held high. Not the woman who said love wasn't enough. This version shook. This version looked like she hadn't slept in days. This version whispered, not demanded. She said my name like it was something fragile, like it might break if she got it wrong. Her voice trembled as she spoke of him, the man in the Mercedes, the trips that felt like auditions, the parties where she smiled wide, laughed louder, dressed up just to be ignored. She said he didn't look at her the way he used to, didn't touch her with the same hunger, that somewhere along the way she stopped being exciting, stopped being new. And just like that, he moved on to someone younger, fresher, less complicated. She said she thought she was building a life. Turns out she was filling a role, and the casting had ended. She told me about the nights she cried in hotel bathrooms, mascara running, pretending the champagne didn't taste like shame, about how all the things she'd chased, the clothes, the dinners, the yacht weekends, turned to ash the moment she realized she was alone in every photo. Possession, not a partner. She said she made a mistake, that I was the only one who saw her, really saw her, without expectation or performance. She reached for my hand, like it still belonged to her, but it didn't, not anymore, because time does something that apologies can't. It teaches you the difference between being missed and being needed. And she didn't miss me. She missed being safe. I didn't slam the door, didn't yell, didn't say, I told you so. I simply looked at her, this woman who once erased me like a bad decision, and realized something I hadn't known until that moment. I didn't love her anymore. She asked if we could start over. I didn't know what to say. The question hung in the air like breath on a cold window. Soft, fragile, but impossible to ignore. Can we start over? Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. Just a request to rewrite the ending, as if the story hadn't already been told. Part of me wanted to say yes, not out of hope, but out of habit. There's a part of you that never stops wanting to protect the person you once loved, even if they're the reason you had to protect yourself in the first place. I wanted to hold her, to shield her from the wreckage she helped create, to believe just for a moment that the past could be undone. But another part, the one that had bled and scarred and stood up on shaking legs, that part stayed quiet. And in that silence, I realized something. She hadn't just left me. She'd left the version of me that existed only to make her happy. I had rebuilt, not out of revenge, not out of pride, but out of necessity, a quieter life, an honest one, no surprises, no performances, just mornings that started with peace, and nights that ended without wondering who she was texting. I had found comfort in the mundane, and in that comfort I found myself again. She looked around my home like it was unfamiliar, and in a way it was. The pictures were new, the books were mine. Even the plants she never watered had been replaced by ones that thrived. I wasn't the man she left, and she wasn't the woman I'd waited for. Could I trust her again? That was the real question. Because love doesn't disappear. It fades. It bruises. Sometimes it even heals. But trust, that's something different. Trust shatters. And even when you glue the pieces back together, it never sounds the same when you tap on it. I didn't answer her right away. I just stared at the woman in front of me. The one who once traded stability for sparkle. The one who returned not with love, but with regret. Regret isn't love. Regret is the echo left behind when love is gone. Can we start over? She asked it with tears in her eyes, but not the kind that heal, the kind that beg. And the truth is, I didn't know what to say, because the story I was writing no longer had her name in the margins. She came looking for the man who never left, but I had. She stood there, waiting for a version of me that no longer existed. The one who used to lose sleep over her silence, who memorized her smile like scripture and forgave things that should have broken him. But he was gone, and I didn't mourn him anymore. I told her the truth, not to hurt her, not to shame her, just because it was time. I loved you, with everything I had, and I did. I loved her with the kind of desperation that makes you ignore warning signs and redefine pain as patience. But that version of me, the man she left standing in a house full of her echoes, he didn't survive. He died the day she chose someone else. She nodded. No words, no apology this time, just silence. The kind that says more than begging ever could. She turned to go, and this time I let her. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There was no crack in my voice, no tremble in my chest, just a door closing quietly behind her. The final page of a book I no longer needed to reread. She came looking for the man who never left. But I had. I'd left the moment I realized love should never make you feel small. That the right person doesn't make you prove your worth, they recognize it. Some wounds don't reopen. They just remind you where the knife went in, and why you'll never bleed that way again.